The red blooming across the white silk tablecloth looked too much like a fresh wound. But it was the mark on Nia Thompson's cheek that truly felt like a declaration of war. And in this city, Kang Jae-Min was the only one allowed to declare war. He didn't share his territory, he didn't share his secrets, and he sure as hell didn't tolerate another man leaving his signature on the woman who had lived in his periphery for 4 months. She stammered a frantic apology about the spilled wine, her deep brown fingers trembling as she reached for the glass, her gaze fixed on the floor. But Jae-Min had already stopped listening. The decision had been made the second her hair shifted, revealing the raw redness across her cheekbone. Whoever had dared to touch her had just signed their own death warrant. They just didn't know it yet. Before we reveal Jae-Min's next move, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring these stories to life. The private lounge of the Gilded Lotus was settling into its late-night rhythm. The city's high-ranking officials were filtering out, passing through glass doors guarded by men whose tailored suits barely hid the tactical hardware beneath. Smooth, low-tempo music hummed in the background, but it was drowned out by the heavy thrum of Jae-Min's pulse as he watched her. For months, that's how long Nia had been his personal maid. That's how long he'd been dissecting her every movement. He noticed the exact moment her fragile posture had begun to draw inward, her shoulders curling as if trying to disappear into the crisp, white fabric of her uniform. She flinched when the ice bucket clattered, but she never flinched at him, as if her soul recognized that while he was a monster with a code. He shouldn't be analyzing her this way. She was staff, a line he'd drawn to keep his life clinical and his empire stable. But Nia had a quiet resilience that made him want to erase those lines. When she first arrived, there had been a spark in her glossy eyes, a silent strength that intrigued him. Now, that spark was being smothered, snuffed out by a shadow that forced her to keep her lips pressed tight in restraint. Despite the warmth of the lamplit lounge, Jae-Min felt a familiar, icy coldness settle over him. He tracked her now as she hovered near the table, noting the shallow hitch in her breath. She thought she was being invisible. She didn't realize that to a predator like Jae-Min, she was the only thing in the room worth seeing. Mateo didn't speak until the heavy oak doors of the private office clicked shut, sealing out the muted clink of glassware from the lounge. He stood in the center of the room, a tablet held in his calloused hands, his face a mask of grim professionalism. Across the desk, Jae-Min sat in the shadows, the orange glow of a single lamp illuminating the sharp line of his jaw and the dark ink that crawled up his neck like a warning. "I found him," Mateo said, his voice low. He didn't ask if Jae-Min wanted to know. He knew his boss had been vibrating with a cold, lethal frequency since the moment Nia Thompson had spilled that wine. Jae-Min didn't look up from the spilled liquid on the mahogany surface he was staring at. "Who?" "His name is Marcus Thorne. Detective Marcus Thorne." Mateo tapped the screen and slid it across the desk. "He's a lead investigator with the Major Crimes Unit. He's been the city's golden boy for 6 years. High conviction rates, commendations from the mayor, and a reputation for being the most honest cop on the force." Jae-Min finally looked at the screen. A man with a calculated, easy smile stared back, clean-cut, wearing a badge that sparkled under the camera's flash. He looked like the hero of a story Jae-Min was never allowed to be a part of. "There's a deeper irony, sir," Mateo added, his shadow stretching long against the wall. "Thorne isn't just any detective. He's the head of the special task force currently building the RICO case against our family. He spent the last 18 months trying to put you in a cage, claiming you're a cancer to this city's peace." A dry, humorless chuckle escaped Jae-Min's throat, though his eyes remained frozen. "The man trying to put me away for violence is the same man breaking a woman's spirit in the dark. He preaches law in the daylight and hides behind a badge to commit his own crimes at night." Jae-Min stood up, the movement fluid and dangerous. He walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. He thought of Nia, the way she had flinched when he stepped toward her, the way her deep brown skin had been marred by that ugly, blooming red mark. It wasn't just a bruise to Jae-Min. It was a signature of ownership by a man who thought he was untouchable because he wore a uniform. "The law is a convenient shadow for monsters, Mateo," Jae-Min whispered, his reflection in the glass looking more like a demon than a businessman. "Thorne thinks he's the hunter, and I'm the prey. He thinks he can touch what is mine and go back to his precinct to receive an award." "What are the orders?" Mateo asked. "We can take him tonight. Make it look like a botched mugging." "No." Jae-Min turned back, his expression terrifyingly calm. "If we kill him now, he dies a hero. The city mourns a great protector, and Nia lives the rest of her life in the shadow of a martyr. That is too merciful. I don't want him just dead. I want him exposed. I want the city to see the rot behind that shiny badge." I want him to watch his life crumble brick by brick before he realizes the man he was trying to arrest is the only one who can decide his fate. Jae-Min picked up the tablet, his thumb hovering over Thorne's smiling face. He wants to bring down the Kang family? Let him try. But while he's looking for my paper trail, make sure he finds his own sins coming back to haunt him. Start with the internal files. Find out every time a neighbor called about a disturbance at his house that was conveniently erased. Find every victim he silenced with his badge. The room felt colder, the atmosphere thick with the promise of a coming storm. Jae-Min looked at the door, thinking of Nia somewhere in the estate, likely trying to ice a wound she thought she had to hide. Detective Thorne made a mistake, Jae-Min said, his voice dropping to a predatory silkiness. He thought he was the law. He's about to find out that in this city, I'm the only one who handles the sentencing. The office was a cathedral of shadows and expensive leather, smelling of cedarwood and the lingering weight of secrets. Jae-Min didn't sit behind his desk. Instead, he leaned against the mahogany edge, his arms crossed over his chest, the white silk of his sleeves rolled back to reveal the intricate, dark ink that climbed toward his throat. He watched the door as Nia entered, her footsteps silent on the deep pile of the rug. She looked small in the vastness of the room, her shoulders still curved in that defensive posture he had grown to loathe because it wasn't natural to her. In her hand, she clutched a silver tray as if it were a shield, her knuckles white against the metal. The bruise on her cheek was darker now, a vivid violet against the deep brown of her skin, mocking the disciplined bun of her hair and the crispness of her uniform. You asked to see me, Mr. Kang. Her voice was a mere thread, fragile but holding. Set the tray down, Nia, he said, his voice a low, rhythmic vibration. She obeyed, the tray clattering slightly against the side table. She didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on the polished floor. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until Jae-Min straightened and took a single step toward her. She didn't move, but he saw the way her breath hitched, the instinctual flinch of a woman used to the unpredictable weight of a hand. I know who he is, Jae-Min stated. There was no preamble, no softness. In his world, truth was the only currency that mattered. Nia's head snapped up, her glossy eyes widening with a flash of raw, naked terror. The secret she had guarded like a dying flame was out, and for a moment, she looked like she might bolt. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just clumsy. The wine. The wine was an accident. The bruise was a choice, Jae-Min interrupted, his tone turning to ice. Detective Marcus Thorne. A man who wears a badge by day and breaks his wife by night. A man currently trying to build a cage for me, while he turns your home into one for you. Nia's knees seemed to buckle for a fraction of a second before she caught herself. The air left her in a ragged sob she tried to swallow. He'll kill you, she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic. You don't understand. He's the law. If he finds out I told you, if he thinks I'm seeking help, he'll make sure I never walk out of that house again. Jae-Min moved then, closing the distance until he was standing directly in her space. He didn't touch her. He knew better than to crowd a cornered soul, but he radiated a terrifying, steady heat. The law stops at my gates, Nia, he said, his gaze locking onto hers with a calculated intensity. In this city, there are men who hide behind the light, and there are men who own the dark. Thorne is a coward playing at being a hero. I am exactly what the world says I am, and I am telling you that he will never lay a finger on you again. Nia looked at him, searching the hard, masculine lines of his face. She saw the ruthlessness there, the tattoos that spoke of a life lived in blood and shadows, but she also saw something Thorne had never possessed, a terrifying, unwavering consistency. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling. Nothing is free, not in this house. I want you to stop running, Jae-Min replied, his voice dropping to a predatory silkiness. I am offering you a shield, not because you asked for it, but because I've decided you're mine to protect. From this moment on, you don't go back to that house. You don't answer his calls. You stay within these walls. Nia felt the weight of her isolation finally fracturing. For months, she had been an island, drowning in the middle of a crowded city. She looked at the man before her, a criminal, a titan, a monster by any standard, and realized that the golden boy detective was the only devil she truly feared. She took a shaky breath, the first full lungful of air she'd had in weeks. He won't stop until he finds me. Let him try. Jae-Min's smile was fierce, proud, and utterly lethal. I've been looking for a reason to burn his world down. You just gave it to me. Nia bowed her head, not in submission, but in the quiet, heavy realization that she was no longer alone. The silent agreement was struck, a pact signed in spilled wine and the shadow of a coming war. The digital war room in the sub-basement of the Kang estate hummed with the electric pulse of servers, and the frantic clicking of mechanical keyboards. Jae-Min stood behind his lead technician, a young woman known only as Sora, whose face was washed in the neon blue glow of 3 different monitors. Outside these walls, the city still saw Detective Marcus Thorne as a pillar of justice. Inside, he was already being dismantled bit by bit. Everything he's ever deleted, everything he thought was buried in private servers, it's all coming to the surface, Sora murmured, her eyes tracking lines of code that represented Thorne's life. He was careful, sir. He used encrypted channels for his side deals, but he made one mistake. He used his precinct's backend to scrub the domestic disturbance reports from his own address. Jae-Min leaned down, his eyes narrowing. Pull them. Every single one. I want the timestamps, the names of the officers who responded and then looked the other way, and the audio from the 911 calls Nia thought had disappeared into the ether. With a final keystroke, Sora initiated the sequence, sending to the city's top 3 news desks now. Encrypted, untraceable. I've added the financial records too, the bribes he took to misplace evidence in the O'Malley case last year. By morning, the Golden Boy will be the city's greatest villain. Jae-Min watched the progress bars fill with a grim satisfaction. He wasn't just hitting Thorne. He was erasing the very foundation the man stood on. A man like Thorne thrived on the respect of his peers and the fear of his victims. By stripping away his reputation, Jae-Min was taking away his greatest weapon, his badge's perceived invincibility. By the time the sun began to bleed over the city skyline, the shift in the atmosphere was palpable. Jae-Min sat in his study, the television muted but the headlines screaming in bold, red text. Internal Affairs Probe. Hero Detective linked to evidence tampering. Below it, a smaller, more sinister headline began to trend. Police cover-up? Unsealed records hint at domestic violence. Mateo entered the room, dropping a morning tabloid onto the desk. Thorne's smiling face was on the cover, now crossed out with the word fraud in thick black ink. The precinct is in a frenzy, Mateo reported. The commissioner has already called a press conference. Thorne hasn't shown up for his shift. He's gone to ground. He's not hiding, Jae-Min said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he looked toward the hallway that led to Nia's room. He's desperate. A predator who loses his territory doesn't just run. He looks for someone to blame. He'll realize soon enough that his shadow has been compromised. The calculated strike had worked perfectly. In less than 6 hours, the man who had been building a RICO case against the Kang family was now the subject of a criminal investigation himself. The veneer of the perfect citizen had cracked, revealing the rot beneath. Jae-Min felt no joy in the victory, only a cold, sharpening focus. He knew Thorne wouldn't go quietly into a prison cell. The man was a hunter by nature, and now that his badge was tarnished, he would revert to his most primal instincts. He stood up and walked to the window, watching the city wake up to the news of its fallen hero. The public's adoration had turned to vitriol in a single news cycle. Thorne was no longer the law. He was a target. And Jae-Min was the only one who knew exactly where the target was going to strike next. Double the perimeter guard, Jae-Min ordered without turning around. And tell Nia to stay away from the windows. The beast is cornered, Mateo. And a cornered beast is the only thing more dangerous than a man with a badge. The downfall of Detective Marcus Thorne was as public as it was brutal. By the time the evening rain began to slick the streets of the city, the Golden Boy had been officially stripped of his badge and escorted from the precinct in handcuffs for questioning. But as Jae-Min had predicted, the system was slow, and Thorne's connections had bought him a temporary reprieve, a release on personal recognizance that lasted just long enough for a desperate man to seek out the source of his ruin. The Gilded Lotus was unnervingly quiet, the usual hum of elite conversation replaced by a heavy, expectant tension. Jae-Min sat at his usual corner table, his dark eyes fixed on Nia as she moved through the lounge. She was no longer wearing the maid's uniform. She wore a simple, elegant black dress Jae-Min had provided, yet she still carried herself with the cautious grace of someone waiting for the floor to give way. The piece shattered when the front doors burst open. Thorne didn't look like a hero anymore. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes were bloodshot with a mixture of rage and mounting instability. He pushed past the hostess, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on Nia. The doorman moved to intercept him, but Jae-Min raised a single, leather-gloved hand, signaling them to hold. He wanted to see the predator without his teeth. You think you're safe here? Thorne's voice echoed, raw and jagged. He ignored Jae-Min entirely, stepping toward Nia with the practiced intimidation of a man used to being the most dangerous person in any room. You think this tattooed thug can protect you from me? I made you, Nia. I own you. You're coming home, now. Nia froze, her fingers gripping the edge of a table so hard her knuckles turned ashen. The old fear flickered in her eyes, a reflex born of years of conditioning. Thorne saw it and smirked, emboldened by her silence. He reached out, his hand closing around her upper arm with a bruising grip. I said, let's go. Before Nia could even gasp, the air in the room seemed to vanish. Jae-Min was across the floor in a blurred movement of silk and shadows. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He caught Thorne's wrist in a grip that sounded like dry wood snapping. With a sharp, calculated twist, he forced Thorne to release Nia and sent the former detective stumbling back against a marble pillar. Jae-Min stepped between them, his presence an immovable wall of ink and lethal intent. He was a head taller than Thorne and infinitely colder. You're confused, Jae-Min said, his voice a low, terrifying silkiness that carried further than a scream. You think that because you've lost your badge, you've simply become a civilian. You haven't. You've become a nuisance. And I have a very permanent way of dealing with nuisances. Thorne lunged, a desperate, amateurish swing fueled by ego. Jae-Min didn't even flinch. He parried the blow with ease, his hand catching Thorne's throat and slamming him back into the pillar with enough force to rattle the glassware on the nearby tables. Jae-Min leaned in close, the tattoos on his neck visible beneath the unbuttoned collar of his shirt. Look at her, Jae-Min commanded, his fingers tightening just enough to turn Thorne's face a frantic shade of red. Look at Nia, because it's the last time you will ever be in her presence and remain breathing. You used the law to hide your cowardice. I don't need the law. I am the only authority you have left to answer to. Jae-Min released him, and Thorne slumped to the floor, gasping for air, the realization of his own insignificance finally breaking through the rage. Jae-Min looked down at him with utter disdain, then turned to Nia. He didn't ask if she was okay. He saw the way she was looking at Thorne, not with fear, but with the dawning realization that the monster was actually quite small when the lights were turned on. Mateo, Jae-Min said, never taking his eyes off Nia. Throw this trash into the street. If he touches my property again, don't call me. Just finish it. As Thorne was dragged out, kicking and shouting threats that no longer had any weight, Jae-Min reached out. For the first time, he touched Nia's cheek, not the bruised side, but the other, his thumb brushing her skin with a tenderness that felt more dangerous than his violence. The hunt is over, Nia, he whispered. Now, we begin the harvest. The transition from the lounge to the high-security estate on the city's outskirts was a blur of tinted glass and silent, high-speed movement. Jae-Min didn't take Nia to a hotel or a standard apartment. He brought her to a fortress carved from stone and reinforced steel, hidden behind a wall of ancient weeping willows. Here, the air didn't smell like the city's exhaust or the lounge's expensive bourbon. It smelled of rain and cedar. Nia stood in the center of the expansive living area, her arms wrapped around herself as she surveyed the space. It was beautiful, filled with minimalist furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out into the dark woods, yet it felt like a gilded cage. She jumped at the soft click of a lock, turning to see Jae-Min entering the room. He had discarded his suit jacket, and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the cuffs, revealing the dark, swirling ink on his forearms. The perimeter is monitored by 24-hour thermal imaging, he said, his voice grounding her in the silence. Thorne doesn't have the resources or the sanity left to find this place. You're safe here, Nia. Truly safe. Nia walked toward the window, her reflection ghosting over the glass. I spent 3 years thinking I was safe every time he apologized, every time he promised it wouldn't happen again. Safety feels like a lie I've told myself too many times. She turned to him, her glossy eyes searching for him. Why are you doing this? You're a man who counts every penny, every favor. What is the price for burning down a detective's life for a maid? Jae-Min remained silent for a long moment, the only sound the distant hum of the security system. He walked toward a small bar in the corner, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers, a deliberate, steady contact that didn't make her flinch. My father was a man of high standing. Much like your husband, Jae-Min began, his voice dropping to a gravelly low. He looked down at the ink on his hand, a pattern that resembled a dragon's coil. To the world, he was a philanthropist. In the house, he was a ghost that haunted my mother. He didn't use his fists. He used his words and his influence to make her feel like she was nothing, like she didn't exist without his permission. He took a slow sip, his gaze drifting to a point far beyond the room. I was 12 when I realized the golden boy of the neighborhood was a monster. I watched her spirit get smothered, year after year, until there was nothing left of the woman who used to sing to me. When she finally disappeared, When she finally grew tired of the shadows, he didn't mourn. He just replaced her. Jae-Min looked back at Nia, the intensity in his dark eyes enough to steal her breath. I couldn't save her then. I was a child with no power and no voice. I spent the next 20 years making sure I would never be that helpless again. I built an empire so that I could be the one who decides who lives in the shadows and who gets to see the light. The vulnerability in his confession was raw, a sharp contrast to the brutal man who had slammed Thorne against a pillar only hours before. For the first time, Nia didn't see a boss or a criminal. She saw a boy who had grown into a man determined to rewrite a tragedy he couldn't prevent. I don't hate Thorne because he's a cop, Jae-Min whispered, stepping closer until the heat from his body acted as a second shield. I hate him because he's a bully who thinks a badge gives him the right to snuff out a light like yours. And I've spent my whole life preparing to kill men like him. Nia set her glass down, her hand no longer trembling. She reached out, her fingers tentatively tracing the edge of tattoo on his forearm. It was the first time she had initiated a touch, and Jae-Min's breath hitched in a way that had nothing to do with violence. You aren't your father, Jae-Min, she said softly. No, he agreed, his hand coming up to cover hers, pinning her palm against his skin. I'm much worse. But for you, I'll be exactly what you need. The sanctuary of the estate felt absolute, but in the silence of the woods, desperation was brewing like a storm. Marcus Thorne was no longer a man of the law. He was a ghost haunting the city he once patrolled. He had vanished from his apartment, bypassed his bail check-ins, and shuttered his digital life. He had gone off the grid, a term he had used for years to describe the predators he hunted. Now, he was the prey, and his only focus was the woman he believed had stolen his life. In a windowless basement halfway across the city, Thorne sat amidst a sea of old favors and heavy debts. His face was a map of exhaustion and spiraling psychosis. He didn't have the high-tech servers of the Kang syndicate, but he had something more dangerous, 20 years of dirt on men who still wore the uniform. He reached for a burner phone, his fingers stained with nicotine and frantic energy. It's me, Thorne rasped into the receiver. I don't care about the internal probe. I need the location of the Belandi safe house, the one they call the Willow Estate. Don't tell me you don't have it. I know you processed the zoning permits for the underground security line back in 19. On the other end of the line, a panicked voice whispered about the risks, about Jae-Min's reputation for making people disappear. Thorne's eyes drifted to a photo of Nia he had kept in his pocket, now crumpled and torn. If I go down, I'm taking your pension and your family's name with me. Give me the coordinates, or I start talking to the journalist Jae-Min hasn't bought yet. The silence that followed was the sound of final bridge burning. Moments later, a string of GPS coordinates blinked onto his screen. Thorne smiled, a jagged, hollow expression that held no joy. He knew he couldn't beat Jae-Min in a fair fight, but he didn't want a fair fight. He wanted the leverage that lived behind the reinforced glass of the Willow Estate. Back at the fortress, the atmosphere had shifted. Jae-Min sat in the security hub, his shirt discarded, the dragon tattoos on his back seeming to writhe in the dim light of the monitors. He watched the thermal feeds with the intensity of a hawk. He's silent, Mateo reported, stepping into the room. My sources at the precinct say he's been reaching out to the old guard, men he helped cover up scandals for in the past. He's looking for a way in, boss. He's not running away. He's circling. Jae-Min didn't move. He watched a single heat signature, a deer, moving through the trees on the edge of the property. He thinks his secrets are his currency, Jae-Min said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. He thinks because he knows where the bodies are buried, he can dig his way back to her. He doesn't realize that I'm the one who provided the shovels. Should we move her? Mateo asked. No, Jae-Min replied, finally turning his head. His eyes were cold, devoid of the vulnerability he had shown Nia only hours before. Moving her makes her a target in transit. Here, I have the home field advantage. Let him come. Let him use every debt and every favor he has left to get to these gates. I want him to spend every ounce of his soul just to reach the front door. Jae-Min stood up, the muscles in his back tensing. He thought of Nia upstairs, finally sleeping without the aid of pills, trusting in the walls he had built. Thorne was coming for a ghost of a woman he used to control, but he was going to find a man who had been waiting his whole life to end Monster. Tell the perimeter teams to switch to passive sensors, Jae-Min ordered. I don't want him scared off by a visible patrol. I want him to feel like he's slipping through the cracks. I want him to feel successful right up until the moment the trap closes. The storm was no longer a possibility. It was an arrival. Thorne was coming, fueled by the delusion that his badge still carried weight and his wife still carried his name. He was off the grid, but he was right where Jae-Min wanted him, in the dark where the rules of the law no longer applied. The storm that had been brewing finally broke, and with it came the death of the lights. Inside the Willow estate, the hum of the climate control and the soft glow of the recessed lighting vanished in a heartbeat, swallowed by a thick, suffocating velvet black. Outside, the thermal sensors and cameras fell blind as the main power grid was severed with surgical precision. This wasn't a glitch, it was a breach. Nia was in the kitchen, a glass of water in her hand, when the world went dark. The silence that followed was louder than any thunderclaps, a predatory, expectant silence. She didn't scream. Years of living with Marcus Thorne had taught her that noise was a liability. Instead, she set the glass down with trembling fingers and retreated into the shadows of the pantry, her breath hitching in her throat. A dull thud echoed from the mudroom, the sound of a heavy boot meeting a reinforced door that had been bypassed by a master key Thorne should have surrendered weeks ago. Nia. Thorne's voice was a jagged rasp, slicing through the darkness. It wasn't the voice of the man she had married, nor the golden boy detective the city adored. It was the sound of a man who had burned his own life to the ground and wanted company in the ashes. I know you're in here. I can smell that expensive perfume he bought you. Did you think a few stone walls and a tattooed thug could hide you from me? Nia pressed her back against the cool wood of the shelving, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could hear him moving, heavy, arrogant strides that spoke of a man who still believed he owned every room he entered. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he moved toward the kitchen. You really made a mess of things, Nia, Thorne continued, his voice closer now, drifting through the open doorway. My job, my reputation, my badge, all gone because you couldn't stay in your place. But I'm a forgiving man. We're going to leave this place. We're going to go somewhere where Jae-Min can't find us, and we're going to start over. But first, you need to learn what happens when you betray the man who protected you. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, a harsh, white spear of light that danced across the marble countertops and the shattered remains of the wine glass Nia had set down. She watched the light from the gap in the pantry door, her mind racing. She wasn't the same woman who had cowered in a DC apartment. She remembered the weight of Jae-Min's hand on hers, the heat of his gaze, and the way he had told her that safety wasn't a lie. It was a fortress. She reached back, her fingers brushing against a heavy, cast-iron skillet. It was a clumsy weapon, but it was hers. The flashlight beam landed on the pantry door. Thorne's footsteps stopped. The air seemed to freeze. Found you, he whispered, his tone dripping with a terrifying, familiar affection. The door was ripped open. Nia didn't wait. She lunged forward, fueled by 3 years of suppressed rage and the newfound realization that her life was worth fighting for. The skillet connected with Thorne's shoulder with a sickening thud, sending the flashlight spinning across the floor. Thorne roared in pain, his shadow looming large against the wall as he lunged for her. He caught her hair, pulling her back with a savagery that made her vision swim. You bitch! You think you're strong now? You're nothing. He threw her against the kitchen island, and Nia felt the air leave her lungs. Thorne loomed over her, his face a mask of distorted fury in the flickering light of the fallen flashlight. He raised his hand, the same hand that had left the bruise Jae-Min had seen, but this time he didn't stop. Nobody is coming to save you, Nia, he sneered, his fingers closing around her throat. In the dark, there is no Mafia boss. There is only me. But as his grip tightened, a new sound emerged from the darkness, a slow, rhythmic clapping that echoed from the top of the stairs. It was a cold, dry sound that made the hair on the back of Nia's neck stand up. You're right about one thing, Marcus. A voice silkier and more lethal than the night itself drifted down. In the dark, the rules change. But you're wrong about who owns the shadows. Jae-Min stepped into the faint arc of the flashlight's beam, his eyes glowing with a predatory fire that made Thorne's rage look like a flickering candle. He wasn't holding a gun. He was rolling up his sleeves, the dragon on his arm appearing to breathe in the dim light. I've been waiting for you to break in, Jae-Min said, a cruel smile touching his lips. I wanted to see the look on your face when you realized that I didn't build these walls to keep you out. I built them to keep you in. Thorne froze, his fingers still digging into Nia's throat, his head snapping toward the sound of Jae-Min's voice. In the sickly, flickering light of the fallen flashlight, The former detective looked less like a hunter and more like a cornered animal. Jae-Min descended the stairs with a slow, agonizing grace, his silhouette expanding against the walls until he seemed to fill every corner of the dark kitchen. "Let her go, Marcus," Jae-Min said, his voice dropping to a register so low it vibrated in the floorboards. "You spend your whole life hiding behind things. A badge, a title, a house. But here, in the dark, you're just a man who isn't fast enough to save himself." Thorne tightened his grip in a spasm of desperation, dragging Nia up as a human shield. "Stay back. I'm still an officer of the law. I'll kill her, I swear to God." Jae-Min didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He walked into the arc of the light, his eyes fixed on Thorne with a terrifying, predatory focus. "You aren't a cop anymore. You're a footnote. By tomorrow, the city will have forgotten you ever wore the uniform. You'll be remembered as the man who broke under the weight of his own insignificance." In a move so fast it bypassed the human eye's ability to track, Jae-Min closed the distance. He didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for Thorne's wrist. There was a sickening, wet crack as Jae-Min applied pressure to the radius and ulna, forcing Thorne's hand to release Nia's throat. Nia collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, as Jae-Min spun Thorne around and slammed him face first into the marble island. The sound of Thorne's nose shattering echoed through the silent house. Jae-Min didn't stop there. He grabbed Thorne by the back of his head and forced him to look at Nia, who was pushing herself up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning, fierce clarity. "Look at her," Jae-Min hissed into Thorne's ear. "Look at the woman you thought you owned. She isn't yours. She never was. You were just a ghost she had to outrun, and the sun just came up." Thorne tried to sputter a curse, but Jae-Min slammed his head into the marble once more, effectively silencing him. Jae-Min stepped back, his chest rising and falling in a steady, controlled rhythm. He looked down at Thorne, who was weeping now, not from pain, but from the utter annihilation of his ego. "You wanted to know what happens next, detective?" Jae-Min asked, his voice reaching a lethal silkiness. "I'm not going to kill you. That would be too clean. And I'm not handing you back to the police. They've protected you long enough." Jae-Min whistled once, a sharp, piercing sound. From the shadows of the mudroom, two of his men, Mateo and another silent giant, emerged like wraiths. "Take him," Jae-Min commanded, his eyes never leaving Thorne's broken form. "Take him to the docks. Give him to the men who lost their brothers because of his heroic raids. Let the streets he tried to clean decide what his life is worth. No more badge, Marcus. No more shadow to hide in." As Mateo dragged the sobbing, broken man toward the door, Thorne realized the true horror of his fate. He wasn't being executed by a rival. He was being handed over to the very world he had spent 20 years stepping on. He was being discarded like trash. The heavy door thudded shut, taking Thorne's muffled pleas with it. Silence returned to the Willow estate, heavy and thick with the scent of ozone and spilled iron. Jae-Min turned to Nia. He didn't offer a hand this time. He waited for her to stand on her own. He watched as she wiped the blood from her lip and straightened her shoulders, her fragile posture finally, irrevocably replaced by a spine of steel. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice raspy but clear. "For him, it's just beginning," Jae-Min replied, stepping toward her and finally allowing his hand to cup the side of her face. "But for you, you're done living in the shadows, Nia. Tomorrow, the city is going to find out that the man who tried to break you is gone, and the woman who survived him is the only one left standing." The transition from the chaos of the Willow estate to the calm of the following months was not a return to the old silence, but the beginning of a new, resonant frequency. Marcus Thorne had not simply vanished. He had been systematically erased, stripped of his badge, disowned by the city he had manipulated, and left to the mercy of those he had once oppressed. His name became a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of the precinct. For Nia, the man who had been her personal son in shadow, was finally nothing more than a ghost, one that no longer had the power to make her flinch. Jae-Min stood on the sprawling balcony of his downtown penthouse. The city of souls spread out beneath him like a carpet of neon and glass. The wind whipped at his dark hair, and for the first time in years, the tension in his shoulders felt less like a burden and more like a choice. He heard the glass door slide open behind him, but he didn't turn. He knew the rhythm of her step now. It was no longer the hesitant shuffle of a maid trying to be invisible, but the purposeful stride of a woman who knew she belonged in the room. Nia stepped up beside him, leaning her elbows on the railing. She wore a dress of deep emerald silk that caught the moonlight, her deep brown skin glowing with a health and vitality that had been absent for far too long. The bruise on her cheek had faded into memory, replaced by a gaze that was steady, glossy with intelligence, and entirely unafraid. The news says the final sentencing for Thorne's corruption charges was finalized this afternoon, she said, her voice clear and carrying across the night air. He's going to a maximum security facility, one where the guards aren't on his payroll. He won't last the winter, Jae-Min replied, his voice a low, lethal vibration. My men inside have already been briefed. He'll find that the world he built for others is the one he has to live in now. He turned to her then, his gaze softening as it took in the strength of her profile. I have a house in Jeju. Secured, private. I want you to go there for a while. To heal. Away from the cameras, away from the city. I'll make sure you have everything you need. You'll be my best-kept secret until this all settles. Nia turned her head, her eyes locking onto his with a fierce, unwavering intensity. She didn't flinch. Instead, she took a half-step closer, entering his space on her own terms. No, she said, the single word cutting through the wind. Jae-Min's brows knit together in surprise. No, Nia, I'm trying to protect you. The press is still circling, and my world is. Your world is dangerous, she interrupted, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, right over the dark ink of the dragon on his collarbone. I know that, but I'm done being protected like I'm something fragile that will break if the wind blows too hard. I'm done living in safe houses and shadows, Jae-Min. I've spent my life being someone's secret, someone's victim, someone's property. I won't do it anymore. Jae-Min felt a surge of something he couldn't quite name, pride, perhaps, mixed with a sudden, sharp realization that the woman he had saved had outgrown the cage he was trying to build for her. I want to stay, Nia continued, her voice gaining strength, but not as your maid, and not as a ghost in your penthouse. If I want to be with a man like you, I do it out loud. I stand beside you, not behind you. I want to be your equal, or I want nothing at all. A slow, fierce smile spread across Jae-Min's face, a smile that held no calculation, only a raw, brutal admiration. He reached out, his hand covering hers on his chest, pinning it there so he could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart against his palm. I told you once that the woman I wanted was a survivor, Jae-Min whispered, leaning down until their foreheads touched. I didn't realize she was also a queen. You want to live loudly, Nia? Then we'll give this city something to scream about. He pulled her into him, the dragon on his skin meeting the emerald silk of her dress. The war for her life was over, but the journey of their partnership was just beginning. In the heart of the city, under the watch of 1,000 lights, Nia Thompson finally stopped running. She wasn't a maid, and she wasn't a victim. She was the woman who had survived the dark, and now she was ready to own the light. If this story touched your heart or kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story. Your support keeps these stories coming. Thank you for watching.